I'm Lee Doherty Biddison.
And I'm Carolyn Kamsty-Fowler, and we're your co-hosts for the Johns Hopkins Office of Wellbeing's podcast, Vital Conversations, Influencing Workplace Wellbeing in Healthcare.
We spend a lot of time thinking about how to influence workplace well-being in healthcare, and we're excited to share what we're learning.
Thank you for joining us.
Hello and welcome to the Vital Conversations podcast. I'm Lee Biddison, Chief Wellness Officer for Johns Hopkins Medicine, and your host for today's episode, along with my awesome co-host, Dr. Carolyn Kamsty-Fowler, who is Executive Director for Nursing Wellbeing here at Johns Hopkins. And it is such a pleasure to be here together. Carolyn, we haven't done this in a little while.
Oh, you haven't. Hello, my friend. And I know how much we love getting together to talk about how we impact well-being, so I'm delighted to be with you today.
Yeah, delighted to be able to share this conversation with our listeners. So, hot topic for us, well, really a big hot topic for the last year has been just a lot of change and a lot of transitions. Been changes. We're in academic medicine, changes in academic medicine with funding policies and priorities, changes in thinking about how healthcare, things like Medicare and Medicaid are funded, and those approaches, especially here in Maryland. And there's just a lot to be said about that. And I would love you've taught in the past on change and transition. Would love to hear some of your reflections on the principles that apply in this space. And how we can use those moving forward to effectively embrace the new year.
Wonderful. Well, let's just for a moment separate the fact that there are two big components of this. So the one big component is that when we have rapid change, there are tactical and logistical things that we need to pay attention to, which is a whole different conversation. And then there's the human response to change and transition. And I think that's really what we're talking about, because it's that human response that can feel so hard for us and can lead to challenges to our well-being. So I'm not going to share with you anything sort of earth-shatteringly new, but rather some work from William Bridges. Now, William Bridges wrote a seminal book on change and transition about 35 years ago. And the reason I like his work is because he's very clear to distinguish between what change is and what transition is. And we talk a lot about managing change or living through change, but actually it's not the change we're living through. So a change is a moment in time, something happens or it stops happening. For example, when we're bereaved or we finish grad school or we get married or have children, there's a date on which those things happen. And that's a very clear change from before
Specific time point
to after the change. You're right. It's a very clear before and after. What Bridges described is that there is a physical change, which is before and after, but there is also a period of psychological adjustment, where what we're being asked to do is to transition from a place of where we understood ourselves in relationship to one state of being or one set of conditions. And we're now being asked to transition to the reality of living in a different set of conditions. And what's important about this, firstly, is that it's frightening and it's stressful, and we have to acknowledge that and not downplay it. I think a lot of us want to get busy and fix things and do things and say, well, the other stuff will take care of itself. No, it won't.
We like to distract ourselves.
We do, indeed. We love to distract ourselves. And also I think sometimes the temptation for leaders is to get busy with the logistical things because firstly, they're important to take care of. Secondly, they're clear. Like, I know what I have to do. Whereas dealing with the psychological response to transition, it's messy. It's more of that emotional response stuff that we heard when we were teaching crisis leadership, how people say that's the piece that feels stressful because it's something we're not used to dealing with. So in this period of transition that Bridges calls the neutral zone, we see several things happening. We see people's motivation dropping off. We see people's engagement dropping off. We see people's, collaboration and energy dropping off. And it's so easy for us to try and manage that tactically, like we just need you to produce more or do more or be here more. But what we're being invited to do is to say, what is the lived experience of our colleagues when they are living through this transition, and what do they need to help them firstly come to terms with where we're journeying to, and also what do we need to do to help acknowledge their experience so that we can support them in moving through the transition more smoothly.
That's so rich, and I love the clarity that that brings, I think, separating the change from the transition and thinking about the transition as being much more fluid and also much harder to manage. Um, you mentioned the we did some you did some teaching in crisis leadership and other members of the team were involved in that, during COVID. But there were some big pieces of that I think resonate very much with, the more recent changes that people have been navigating. Um, a big piece of that is the communication piece, and I just curious about your thoughts on, as you look back to what we learned from that other the pre-post COVID transition, uh, what some of those key learnings were that are really important for us to remember now.
Well, before I actually discuss the key learnings, I'd like to give gratitude to two groups of people, one person and a group of people. Firstly, Dr. George Everly, who was the person who brought his expertise about crisis leadership to us and helped shape our
Absolutely.
thinking of that.
Yeah.
So, George, if you're listening, shout out to you. And the other group of people I want to say thank you to before I tell you what I learned was the 1,700 plus leaders that I worked with in facilitating that training, because we learned so much about what it's like to be in the trenches, leading through change, leading through disruption, leading through ambiguity from them. And so part of the wisdom we're sharing is what we learned from them.
And so
I
much
think
of that wisdom really doesn't show up in a textbook, does it? It's the
no,
lived experience, and it's
lived
very
experience. Yeah, I
rich.
think the first thing that I would share, and as my friend and my colleague, that this has become a professional obsession for me, is the importance of listening. But where I really heard that was when I was talking with the leaders about what is the hardest thing that you are having to do to lead through this change during COVID. What people said to me is, managing the people, listening to the people, this feels like a full-time job, and I don't feel fully equipped to do it. And so we began to think more and more. Well, firstly, I was grateful that they were self-aware enough and compassionate enough to want to be doing it better.
Absolutely.
And we were aware that it was exhausting to them. And so I think that one of the key principles that we learned and that we facilitated understanding of was the fact that we're invited to listen before we speak and to listen much more than we speak.
Our another colleague who was involved in some of this early work, Paula Teague, I remember she would talk about the ratio of listen, listen, talk, listen.
Mhm.
So about one part talking to three parts listening. But it's hard. It's hard to be a good listener. I we've had lots of conversations. You've done lots of training. We've done some training together on what it means to build a listening culture and to listen well. But it takes work. It takes work, and it's a skill. I've reflected many times, Carolyn, on how, in the spaces we've talked about, the fact that we get lots and lots of training in our professional lives on how to give a good talk, on how to present well, on how to speak clearly, all of which are important skills. But it's just one part of the equation, the communication equation, and it's perhaps the less important part, especially, in times of transition and change, etc. So interesting.
I I couldn't agree with you more. And I think one of the challenges to becoming a good listener and becoming an effective listener is that we are so busy. We have so much going on in our brain that while we are allegedly listening to what people are talking to us about, we're processing it. We're processing it to either disagree with it or to try and fix it or to respond to it. What we're seldom doing is listening to understand. And even when people will say things to us that we might not understand, it's so easy for us to sort of fill in the gap with an assumption. I think that's what they're telling me,
Absolutely.
as opposed to saying, what is it that you mean by that? Now, I did a podcast with Dr. Deb Baker, our chief nursing executive, and she was talking about the impact of a question that I shared with her during the pandemic, and that is sort of the and what else
I
question.
was just going to ask you about that. Tell us about that.
Tell us about that. Well, this is the work of Michael Bungay Stanier. His question again, that this question comes from him. But essentially, one of the things I realized is that we have come into a helping profession. Every one of us who works in healthcare came into this profession to help people. And so we want to help, we want to fix, we want to solve, we want to reduce people's suffering. And that sets us up for trouble when it comes to being a great listener. Because if I am listening with the intent to fix something or to help you or to provide an answer to you or help you find some certainty, then what I am doing is I am not actually unpacking what it is you're wanting to say to me. And so what Michael Bungay Stanier recommends is this question called the or question, or the and what else. So when somebody is saying, like, this is what's troubling me, you might say, well, and what else? And gradually you're going to repeat that and what else several times. Now, not to be repetitive, there are different ways of doing it, but essentially what we're inviting people to do is to just keep talking and reflecting on what's going on with them. And at some point, the sort of it's almost like you're taking the pressure out of a pressure cooker.
You're
At some
offloading
point,
the tension. Yeah.
right, that's kind of it's coming off, because I've always said the time to ask what's going on is not when you try and like, we're not going to take the lid off a pressure cooker when it's blowing steam. That's
Right.
just a disaster waiting to happen. So we want the pressure to come down, then we can take the lid off and look inside and see what's going on. And the same is true when people are in this
I
position.
love that analogy.
Right? That we want to be able to give them enough space that they can get some of this steam, the anxiety, whatever the frustration is, off. And then once they've settled, we can ask them what they want to talk about. And so a question that I will often, when people are talking to me and they've given me a lot of different things, I might just firstly acknowledge and say, that's a lot. That feels like a lot to be dealing with.
I feel like you've said that to me before, Carolyn.
Oh, I have. I've even said it to myself before. Because the piece that I follow up with is, and what piece of this feels like the place we need to start? Or what piece of this feels the most important to you right now, or the most pressing to you right now, depending on the context of what's being shared? I will always ask this question, and what part of this is the piece that we need to be talking about? So one of two things will happen. People either have enough clarity that they'll say, well, actually, this is the priority. I want to talk about this first. Or more often, which always makes me smile internally, they'll say, oh no, none of that. That's not the issue at all. This is the issue. Because because what we've done when we've listened to them is we've given them the space to unpack it. And in unpacking it and getting some distance from it, they're able to get increased perspective on it.
And identify the thing underneath all of that.
Yes.
So good. So, so good. What do you say to the person who says, I agree with you, Carolyn. I think listening is so important. I just don't have the time. I'm working with my team. We've got a ton going on. I'm managing so much. And I don't know how to find the time to do that.
I think the thing we have to remember is listening is part of communication. And if the goal is effective communication, so that I hear what somebody is trying to say to me, they are able to hear and process what I am trying to say to them. The metric we should be looking at is not necessarily just time, it's what is the effectiveness of the communication that we're
Oh,
trying to.
that's good. Yeah. Say more about that.
Because if we are in a conversation where we're trying to exchange ideas or understand what's going on, and one or both of us is not listening properly. Especially, let's just say one person's not listening, and I'm trying to share with you things that are concerning me, and you're just not listening to me. Because it's so important historically, it's been so important in our evolution that we feel that we're accepted and heard because that gave us the message that we were safe within our community, within our tribe. We are very, very good at knowing when we're not being heard. The minute that and this doesn't even have to be a conscious recognition, the minute my body or my brain recognizes that I'm not being listened to, it interprets that as risk. And so we begin to go into a more defensive position where we're trying to understand what we need to do to make ourselves be heard. Now, whether that's talking louder or performing the way a child might cry louder if they haven't been fed, or whether it's trying to find somebody else to talk to or just keep talking so somebody is forced to listen to us, we begin with patterns in communication which are completely not effective. So even though we may only take, 4 minutes or 5 minutes, essentially we've wasted 5 minutes because nobody has communicated effectively. And when I'm stressed and I'm afraid, my ability to process, to reason clinically is less clear. And so therefore the arguments I'm making are less articulate. They may be more long-winded, or I may just not even be able to put it into words at all. So essentially we've put some time in, but we've got no effective communication. When we have a situation where two people are able to listen to each other deeply, and it doesn't actually need to take a lot longer, it can be the same or shorter. When we are able to listen to each other deeply, the person who is talking is under less pressure to talk quickly. They have time to get their thoughts organized and to explain what it is they're trying to say. And the person who's listening has time to really receive it, hopefully with curiosity, and be able to clarify. And so what we have is time that's been then invested in effective communication. So when people say to me, I don't have time to listen, what I offer them is, given how busy and critical some of the work is that's going on, we don't have time to not listen. Because every minute we spend not listening to other people is a minute wasted and then potential risk introduced.
That's so important.
But I actually got sidetracked from the all question.
You did, sorry.
And and so we talked all about that. But the thing that Deb Baker taught me was that she said she felt that when she was able to avoid jumping straight in to fix the first thing people said was the issue, she was more able to be fully present with people and to be a better witness to what their experience was of this disruption that was happening in their lives. And so therefore developed greater insight into what it was that were really the issues that people were facing.
Insight, and I imagine empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so let's say that we all agree that we can't afford not to listen. But now we're in this space of, but things are changing so fast. I just need to wait till things settle out enough that I know what to say when I'm responding. Like, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of transition, there's a lot happening. But there's going to be an update in another 24 hours, or an update thinking back to COVID times, right? There was an update every 20 minutes. It's felt like, but I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to wait. That leader says, in terms of communicating, what, have talked a lot about some of the risks associated with that, but I'd love to sort of hear your thoughts, and lived experience as you talk to leaders in that space and how it might apply now.
Well, I think there are two related principles here. The first is that that moment of absolute certainty is never going to arrive.
Mhm.
And so if we keep waiting to say, when am I going to be certain? When am I going to be certain? When am I going to be certain? When am I going to feel that this is correct enough or close enough to communicate? We're never going to get there. Time will just keep passing and we'll never get there. Now, I'm not suggesting that there aren't situations where certainty is essential, like medication dosing and safety time and so on, which is another situation in which we've understood the importance of listening, right? We've got to listen during those. But the other principle that is the one that we really need to remember is there's no such thing as an information vacuum. So that if you are not communicating with me, if you are not giving me information about what's going on, it's not that I'm sitting there waiting for you to tell me and I'm not thinking of any other options. I will fill that vacuum with available information. Sometimes it will be my assumptions or my fears. Other times it will be misinformation that I'm getting from the internet or misinformation that we're getting via the gossip chain that's happening in our organization. And the more that people don't get the information they need, the more they feel that people are not sharing information, the more they become suspicious of the motivation of leaders. They stop being trusting in the leaders. They think that leaders are withholding information, they're not being transparent. Typically, people assume the worst, so that they assume that it has to be bad news, because if it weren't bad news, they'd be telling them something. And so there is no situation in which we can win this. We have, even if what we're saying is we hear your concern and we are working on it and we want to be clear about what it is that we don't want to be chopping and changing. We want to be able to give you a clear response, and we're going to check in with you daily until we've got it. Is even if it's just that, like, we hear you, we're working on it, and we are going to continue to check in. That's important. And or to do what I think a lot of our leaders did quite effectively during COVID, which was to say, given how quickly everything's changing, what I tell you today may need to be updated and changed 2 days from now.
So
And so we are
letting people know that up front. Yeah.
right, completely transparent. We're gonna give you our best decisions. Given the information we have, we're gonna give you our best decisions, our best judgment today. And we're going to be vigilant about things that may require that to change. And if we have to change, we are going to let you know as soon as we know that. Because that has people feel respected. It has people feel included. And we just feel safer when we feel that everybody's watching out for everybody else.
This is reminding me of that first round of data we looked at on our interprofessional well-being survey in the summer of 21. So not long after COVID, or really kind of still coming out of it. And how strong the association was between that question, that leadership question we asked around whether your supervisor kept you informed of information that impacted your work. If people answered that positively, they were much less likely to be burned out and more likely to feel fulfilled. And that was such a impactful lesson to me to see that data, that it's people that, knowledge in a sort of form of knowledge is power. It's that it's as much as you can know, knowing that and feeling like you're being offered that as often as possible, um, really does impact people's overall experience of transition.
It does. And people are afraid of the unknown, and there's a reason for that, right? We we don't know what we're walking into. It's like trying to walk down a street in the dark. You don't know what you're going to trip over or who's around a corner. It's frightening to us. We know that it is. And so I think that's another principle that the Bridges talks about a lot, which is the importance of regular communication, and not just generic communication, but communicating in different ways with different messengers at different times. And he talks actually about 4 Ps that need to be part of communication in change, which I find interesting. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who write about change communication, but let me just
Sure.
offer this because it's a good framework just to think about. So when he talks about the 4 Ps, he says, so when we're communicating about a big change or something that has to happen, we first need to be very clear about what the problem is. What is it that we're dealing with that is requiring us to initiate a process of change and transition in the first place? Why is this necessary? And as much as possible, when we can have conversations where we're able to tap into, are we clear about how this why would land for other people? That's also helpful because this may be our why as leaders, or this may be the executive team's why because they are privy to all sorts of important information that helps them be clear about that why. Without that context, without that background, without that expertise, we might not come to the same conclusions. And so,
May not
tapping
even
in-
recognize there is a problem.
right.
Yeah.
And we don't know what we don't know. And so, being able to sort of tap into how does this resonate with people? Do people believe us when we say that this is something that we are going to have to do? It's clear we need to check for real understanding of that in people. The second is the picture. We have to paint a picture for what change will look like, or what things will look like after this change. Remember that that's just a time. So when we've had funding challenges or reimbursement challenges or staffing changes, or when we're introducing technology, virtual nursing, scribing, all sorts of ideas that may help us but have not been what we've been using historically.
They're new, they're different. Yep.
They're new, they're different. And so we have to paint this picture of what will that look like and what will be possible for us when we've made this transition? What will we be able to do together, etc. Right? So that picture has to be painted because people can't imagine it.
I'd love this point, Carolyn, because I think it's analogous to the information vacuum. Which if there's a picture vacuum, we're going to paint a picture that maybe sort of manifests all our concerns or anxieties or fears rather than the true end goal.
Right.
So important.
And
Sorry,
when we think about
P3.
I know, but if you think about it, when we then, when we talk to clinicians and leaders, even a year into the pandemic or even 18 months, and we invited them to look back and look at what they've learned, the skills they've developed, how they'd reimagined their practice, how they'd reimagined care delivery. I mean, the just incredible level of adaptability and development and learning that happened is really quite extraordinary. And yet, if in March of 2020, we'd said to people, 18 months from now, you will have done all of this, they'd be like, oh no, but we could never do that. And yet we all did. We all did. It was not without stress. It was not without pressure. It wasn't without cost. Of course it wasn't. But we have an incredible capacity to flex. And I think that's one of the challenges right now in healthcare. We're being challenged to change a lot of things really quickly. And so there's a lot of change going on. And that I think is what's making it feel so anxiety provoking, because it's not just one change we can wrap our heads around. There are all sorts of things in the air at the same time. And that's the challenge. The third P, though, let's get back to that, is the plan. We need to be transparent about, as we're moving forward in addressing this, or as we're moving forward in rolling out this change, what's the plan for it? Like, what can we expect? What sort of timeline are we on? Importantly, and I have an evaluation background, so I'm always going to advocate for this piece. Are we allowing a period in which we roll something out and we are very open to the fact that there could be mistakes, there could be things that are not working, there could be things that need to be adjusted. So we're not thinking it's finished and we're just going to roll it out, but we're very much in that design thinking place of there are going to be several iterations. We need to keep getting feedback, adjusting, tweaking until this fits with our practice environment. But that plan is something that's important because when people are going on a journey, which is what transition is, right? It's a journey from where you were to where you're going to be. It's like saying to somebody, well, we want you to navigate across the country without any kind of navigation help, right? You just need to be there by a certain date. Go west. Go west. And you could find yourself, well, even if you were going northwest, you're off track, right? So that idea that the plan has to involve some monitoring of it, which allows us to say, are we on track? What do we need? What skills do people need in terms of being upskilled, supported, etc.? So that's the plan. And then the fourth P is, what is my part? What part do I have to play in this? Because if our executives are talking to us, our senior leaders are talking to us, it's clear they may be clear, or we may be clear what it is we're being asked to do in our roles. And for many of our colleagues, that may not be clear at all. It's like, well, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to stop doing? What do you want me to do? And so I think helping people to get very clear about what is my role in this. What am I being asked to do? What am I not being asked to do? How much am I being asked to lift of this burden? How much am I absolutely not being asked to lift? That's really important. It helps us with ownership, and it helps us sort of get a sense of whether or not I feel equipped for what it is that my part in this process is.
Adds a little bit of ownership, as we engage everybody. Actually, everybody has a part, and here is yours, and clearly defining that. I love that. I love that.
But a part of holding people accountable is being clear that when things are being delegated, they're being delegated fairly, equitably, that people have the skills and the resources necessary to do what it is we're delegating to them. So it's not fair for us to hold people accountable for practicing differently or doing things differently if we have not asked the question, what do they need to be successful to do this?
So true. So true. So are we ready to navigate all the change? If I get an A on this quiz, Carolyn, can I get there?
Well, and I always feel a little bit like an imposter when we have these conversations because I have change and transition anxiety as well. And so I think, in our space, so I mean, no one's going to get an A on it, right? It's like we're aiming for progress, not perfection. But I think what is important is that we are authentic, that we're transparent, that we tell the truth. And that may seem like, why
This
are
is
you
one of
telling-
those crisis leadership communications principles too. That's what makes you credible.
Right. Well, and people say, but of course I'm telling the truth. And yet I would challenge each one of us to think of a time when we have avoided telling the truth or the whole truth or the difficult truth because we just didn't want to deal with the emotional fallout of it or the pushback of it. And so we're actually not telling the truth by omission.
Right.
We're not having those important conversations. So I think it's important because I think in order to be able to feel safe with each other during times of change, we need to feel that people are being honest with us. And some of that requires us as leaders, and I'm not in a position of leading this kind of change, so I just want to be clear about this. But I think part of it also invites us to say, how much of this are we going to trust our colleagues with? Because sometimes when we, with all good intention, decide that some of this is just too much for our people to handle.
Yeah.
We do something that is violating another principle of this leadership, which is we get in the way of their autonomy, we get in the way of their agency, and therefore we're compromising their sense of empowerment and motivation. And
But
so
that's a whole other podcast.
that's another whole podcast. So I think the thing that's really important about this is for all of our leaders who are in this space, thank you for being honest and transparent and authentic about how stressful it is. I mean, we've had leaders in our health system say, this is hard. It's stressful and I'm stressed and I'm waking up at night about this. You know, we want people to actually tell us the truth.
Yes.
And we want people to communicate with us and work with us so that we feel that we have some capacity to actually be an active part of this process.
So true. So true. Thank you, Carolyn, for jumping on and doing this conversation. We need to do this more often. We said it's been a while, and it absolutely has been a while. Any final words for our listeners?
I would just invite our listeners, when they find themselves in these situations, to challenge themselves to stay fully present and curious, and to give yourself permission not to feel that you are responsible for every piece of the solution. Allowing our humanity to be visible, I think, is a good thing.
Well said. Well, thank you again for this really fun conversation. I'm Lee Binnison, and this is...
And I'm Carolyn Kumsty-Fowler, and we always love hearing from you. So that's it for today. If you enjoyed what you heard, please share this podcast with a colleague. And as always, we welcome your feedback.
If there are any topics you'd like to hear about, please email us at owb@jhmi.edu.